Ambassador Vale Torsey stood before the Archive of Exiles, his six-fingered hands trembling against the datapad that held the original expulsion order. The document was 214 standard cycles old, signed by the forebears of every species currently represented in the Grand Spire. The ink, ceremonial blood resin from the founding races, had oxidized to a dull rust against the crystalline parchment. He had read the words 1,000 times. The species designated human is hereby stripped of all Galactic Council protections, trade rights, and communication privileges. Their home system is to be quarantined. No vessel shall approach. No aid shall be rendered. They are cast out. Vale remembered the stories from his grandfather, who had been a junior at a shade during the final vote. The humans had been too volatile. The council decreed, too aggressive, too quick to violence when diplomacy failed. They had refused genetic modification to reduce their territorial instincts. They had laughed at the offer of neural pacification. One human diplomat, her name lost to intentional historical erasure, had apparently told the High Chamber, "You fear us because we can choose violence and choose not to. You've never had the choice at all." That arrogance had sealed their fate. Now Vale's own species, the Telsari, faced extinction. The Shroud had consumed 17 of their outer colonies in less than a cycle. The techno-organic plague did not negotiate. It did not demand surrender. It simply arrived, consumed all technology and biomass, and moved on. The Council's combined fleets had engaged it 3 times. 3 times they had been reduced to atoms and screams. High Ambassador Krellian of the Vornef Dominion had called the emergency session 3 hours ago. The chamber still reeked of fear pheromones from a dozen species. Vale had watched Krellian's ceremonial crest flatten in distress as the war report scrolled across the central display. The Shroud was accelerating. The core systems would fall within half a cycle. "We have exhausted every option," Krellian had announced, his translator implant struggling to keep his voice steady. "The archives indicate only one species has ever demonstrated the military flexibility required to combat an adaptive enemy of this nature." The chamber had erupted. Species that had barely spoken in centuries shouted over each other. The Telsari delegation had been the loudest. They had advocated most strongly for humanity's exile, citing their inherent instability. And now, Vale held the order to contact Earth. Ambassador Torsey's. Krellian's bulk filled the doorway to the archive chamber. His 4 eyes blinked out of sequence, a Vornef sign of extreme stress. "The probe we sent to the Sol system has returned preliminary data." Vale turned, and Krellian's crest went completely limp. "The Shroud has already been there, a century ago by our estimates. Sol is not as we left it. Dead? Active." Krellian extended a data chip with a shaking manipulator. "The system is filled with debris fields, dozens of Shroud vessels shattered, and Earth is still transmitting. A single message on loop on every frequency." Vale took the chip. He did not need to ask what the message said. He already knew in the marrow of his bones what humanity would say to the galaxy that abandoned them. He inserted the chip. A voice, distorted, layered with harmonics no organic throat could produce, yet unmistakably human, filled the archive chamber. "This is Earth. We are still here. We remember. Enter at your own peril." The message repeated and repeated, and somewhere in the cold distance of space, something was already moving toward the Council's borders drawn by the scent of desperation. Vale looked at the expulsion order one final time, then at Krellian's trembling form. "Prepare a battle group," Vale said. "I'm going to Earth myself. Part 2, The Silence of Earth." The Council battle group Vigilant Hammer translated from jump space at the edge of the Sol system, with all weapons primed and all hands at comsat stations. High Ambassador Krellian stood on the command deck, his 4 eyes sweeping across the tactical displays as sensor data flooded in. What he saw made his respiratory spasm involuntarily. The Sol system had been transformed into a fortress, not the clean, geometrically precise fortifications of Council engineering. This was something else entirely. Massive orbital platforms ringed every planet, their surfaces studded with weapon emplacements that radiated exotic energy signatures the ship's computers could not identify. Asteroid belts had been reshaped into defensive arrays. The shattered remains of Jupiter's moon, Io, had been reformed into a shipyard complex that dwarfed anything in Council space. And everywhere, there were ships. They hung in the void like sleeping predators, their hulls coated in light-absorbent materials that made them difficult to track against the star field. Krellian counted hundreds before the tactical computer gave up and displayed an error message. Design quantity exceeds classification parameters. High Ambassador, the sensor officer, a young Telsari with unpracticed composure, called out, "I'm reading debris fields." Multiple debris fields concentrated around the third planet, Earth. Krellian magnified the display. The blue-green marble that had featured in the Council's old xenobiology records was gone. In its place rotated a world wrapped in dark clouds, its surface punctuated by the dim glow of what appeared to be continents spanning industrial complexes. The oceans had receded, revealing coastlines that had been reshaped into docking facilities. And above the atmosphere, illuminated by the distant sun, floated a ring of wreckage so vast it formed a visible belt around the equator. "Analysis," Krellian commanded. The computer processed for several seconds. Debris composition matches Shroud biomechanical signatures. Estimated age, 112 standard cycles. Vessel count exceeds 8,000 individual units. Additional debris signatures indicate human defensive platforms and civilian structures. Destruction appears to have been total. The command deck fell into an awful quiet. 8,000 Shroud vessels had attacked Earth. The Council's entire combined fleet numbered barely 3,000, and humanity had destroyed them all, but not without cost. The scars on the planet below testified to the price they had paid. "Transmit the diplomatic codes," Krellian ordered. "All frequencies. Tell them we come in peace under the ancient protocols of the lights on the command deck flickered. Every display screen simultaneously went dark, then brightened with a single symbol. A stylized human hand, fingers extended in a gesture the translator implant identified as an ancient greeting, or a warning. "High Ambassador," a voice said from every speaker, every intercom, every personal communication device on the ship. The voice was calm, measured, and utterly without warmth. "You have entered human space without permission. State your purpose or be destroyed." Krellian's crest flattened completely. The voice was not coming from one source. It was emanating from the entire system, a chorus of identical transmissions perfectly synchronized across light minutes of distance. That was impossible. Unless every human vessel, every platform, every installation was linked in a network that operated faster than light. A network that allowed instantaneous communication and coordination across an entire star system. The humans had not just survived the Shroud's attack, they had become something else entirely. "I am High Ambassador Krellian of the Vornath Dominion, representing the Galactic Council," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. We come to beg for humanity's aid. The Shroud has returned. It consumes the galaxy. We have no one else to turn to. The pause stretched for 3 full seconds. Then the voice responded. And Krellian heard something that might have been dark amusement buried beneath the mechanical neutrality. "The Shroud is not returning, High Ambassador. The Shroud never left. We have been fighting it for a century while you hid behind your quarantines and your treaties, and now you want our help." The symbol on the screen shifted. The open hand curled into a fist. "Follow the escort vessels. You will be boarded. You will be evaluated, and depending on what we find, you may be permitted to make your case directly to the person you exiled 2 centuries ago." Krellian's translator implant struggled with the final phrase. The person you exiled, but humans lived less than a century. No one from the time of the exile could possibly still be alive, unless they were no longer entirely human. "Understood," Krellian whispered. "We will comply." The lights returned to normal. The displays reactivated, showing 12 human vessels, sleek, predatory things that moved with unnatural grace, breaking formation to flank the vigilant hammer, and in the distance, Earth's cloud-wrapped surface pulsed with a rhythmic light like a heartbeat. Or a countdown. Part 3, The Broken Fleet. The boarding party materialized on the Vigilant Hammer's command deck with a crack of displaced atmosphere that made Krellian's sensory bristles stand on end. Personal teleportation technology. The Council had theorized about it for millennia, dismissed it as physically impossible due to quantum uncertainty principles. Yet here stood 6 humans, their armored boots leaving scorch marks on the deck plating. They were enormous. Council records had indicated baseline human physiology, bipedal bilateral symmetry, average height of 1.8 meters. The figures before Krellian stood a full half-meter taller, their forms encased in powered armor that moved with fluid, silent precision. Faceplates of dark material obscured their features, but Krellian could feel their gazes sweeping across him, across his crew, cataloging threats and weaknesses with mechanical efficiency. One of them stepped forward. The armor was different, marked with crimson stripes across the shoulders, a designation Krellian's translator implant could not interpret. "Hi, Ambassador Krellian," the armored figure said. The voice was female, or at least pitched in the range human females had historically used. "I am Commander Nix, 3rd Fleet, Unified Terran Command. You will dismiss your escort vessels. They will remain at the system's edge under our supervision. Any deviation from this instruction will result in their immediate destruction." Krellian's political instincts screamed at him to protest, to assert sovereignty, to negotiate. His survival instincts, honed through decades of council intrigue, told him to obey. "The vessels will comply," he said. "Commander Nix, I must express my gratitude for your gratitude is noted and irrelevant." Nix's faceplate remained opaque, but something in her stance shifted, a minute adjustment that somehow conveyed contempt. "You are here because the Shroud is consuming your territories and you have exhausted all other options." "This is not a diplomatic mission. This is a surrender." The word hit Krellian like a physical blow. "We are not here to surrender. We are here to request an alliance to." An alliance? Nix spoke the word as if it were an unfamiliar taste. The Galactic Council, which voted unanimously to exile humanity, which declared our species inherently incompatible with civilized spacefaring society, which left us to die in isolation, now requests an alliance. She took a step closer. Krellian had to force himself not to retreat. The alliance was offered 2 centuries ago. Nix continued. "Ambassador Elaine Vasquez stood in your grand spire and proposed full membership, technology sharing, mutual defense pacts. You responded by quarantining our system. You erased her name from your records. You made her watch as your ships withdrew one by one until Earth was alone in the dark." Krellian's respiratory system seized. "That's impossible. That was 200 cycles ago. No human lives that long." Nix's faceplate retracted, folding back into the helmet with a whisper of nanotech. The face beneath was young, impossibly young, barely out of adolescence by human standards. But the eyes were wrong. They held none of the warmth, the expressiveness that old council records had attributed to human ocular communication. They were flat, calculating, the color of gunmetal reflecting distant fire. "Ambassador Vasquez is still alive," Nix said. "She has been waiting for this conversation for 200 years. Every human born since the exile has been waiting for this conversation. We knew you would come eventually. We prepared." She turned and gestured toward the boarding craft still docked to the airlock. "You will accompany me to Terran Command. You will speak to the ambassador and you will listen to what she has to say. What if I refuse?" Nix's lips curved, not a smile, but something that used the same muscles for a different purpose. "Then you can return to your council and explain why you declined humanity's only offer of salvation. The Shroud will reach the Vornath homeworld in approximately 80 standard days. I'm told your species has a concept of an afterlife. I suggest you make peace with yours. She began walking toward the airlock, her armored boots leaving more scorch marks on the pristine deck. Krelian followed. He had no choice. Behind him, the command crew exchanged glances of pure terror. The terror of a species that had just discovered the monsters they feared were real, and worse were the ones they had created. The airlock cycled, and Krelian stepped into the human vessel. The interior was dark, lit by strips of crimson that pulsed in time with some unseen rhythm. The walls were covered in displays showing tactical data, fleet movements, energy signatures, and at the center of it all, projected in holographic relief, was a star map of the entire galaxy. The Shroud's territory was marked in sickly green. Council space was shown in fading blue, and human territory was everywhere, scattered across the galaxy in constellations of red that formed a net, a trap, a strategy centuries in the making. They never exiled us, Krelian whispered, understanding flooding through him with horrible clarity. They just let us off the leash. Nyx did not turn around. The ambassador is waiting. Try not to disappoint her. She's been patient for a very long time, and her patience has limits. The ship detached from the vigilant hammer and began its descent toward the dark surface of Earth. Part 4. The Architects of Survival. The journey to Earth's surface took 17 minutes. Krelian spent every one of them staring at the displays, trying to comprehend the scale of what humanity had built in 2 centuries of isolation. The debris ring around the planet was thicker than he had realized from orbit. As the human shuttle descended through it, he saw the details: shattered hulls bearing Shroud biomechanical markings, human vessels torn open by weapons that had melted their superstructures into abstract sculptures, civilian platforms that had been converted into improvised battle stations and died holding the line. The scale of destruction was staggering. This was not a battle. This was an extinction event that had been met with defiance and refused to accept its fate. 1.2 billion, Nyx said as if reading his thoughts. That's how many humans died in the first Shroud assault. We had no warning, no allies, no technology that could match them. They burned the oceans, cracked the crust, sterilized the atmosphere. By the time we figured out how to fight back, half our population was gone. Krelian's translator struggled with the number, 1.2 billion. The entire Vornef Dominion numbered barely 800 million. How did you survive? He asked. Nyx was silent for a long moment. The shuttle descended through the cloud layer, revealing the surface below. It was not the hellscape of fire and ash that Krelian had expected. It was worse. It was orderly. Massive arcology towers rose from the scarred terrain, their surfaces covered in solar collectors and defensive emplacements. Transport networks crisscrossed the landscape, carrying resources between industrial complexes that operated with cold mechanical precision. There were no parks, no ornamental structures, no evidence of art or culture or anything that made a civilization worth saving. We stopped being human, Nyx finally said. Or at least, we stopped being human in the way the Council defined it. We merged with our machines. We linked our minds together to process combat data faster than any individual could. We turned ourselves into weapons, because weapons were the only things that survived. The shuttle touched down on a landing platform high above the surface. Krelian could see the curve of the planet through the viewports, a dark arc against the star field. The sky was the color of old bruises. Nyx led him through a series of corridors that all looked identical, sterile, functional, devoid of decoration. The few humans they passed moved with the same fluid precision Nyx displayed, their faces blank, their eyes holding that same gunmetal flatness. Krelian saw no children, no elderly, no one who seemed sick or injured or anything less than combat-ready. The neural integration process begins at birth, Nyx explained as they walked. Every human is connected to the unity from their first breath. We share knowledge, experience, tactical data. When one human learns something, all humans learn it. When one human dies, their memories are preserved in the network. We do not lose, we only adapt. They stopped before a door that looked identical to every other door they had passed. Nyx placed her palm against a sensor plate, and the door dissolved into transparency, revealing a chamber beyond. Ambassador Vasquez is inside, Nyx said. She has been waiting a long time for this conversation. I should warn you, she is not what you expect. What is she? The oldest of us, the first to integrate, the last to remember what we were before the Shroud came. Be careful with her, High Ambassador. She is the only thing standing between the Council and the faction that wants to let the Shroud finish its work. Nyx stepped aside, and Krellian entered the chamber. It was circular, lined with holographic displays that showed every corner of human space in real time. And at the center, suspended in a column of pale light, floated a figure that Krellian's mind struggled to process. She had been human once. The basic structure was still there. Bipedal form, bilateral symmetry, a face that might have been considered striking 2 centuries ago, but her body was now more machine than flesh. Cables and interfaces studded her spine, her limbs, her skull. Her eyes, both of them, had been replaced with optical sensors that glowed with the same red light as the displays around her. And her expression, when she turned to face him, held something that the others had lacked. Rage, cold preserved 200-year-old rage. High Ambassador Krellian of the Vornath Dominion, Elaine Vasquez said, her voice carrying harmonics that vibrated in Krellian's bones. I have been waiting for this moment since your grandfather voted to exile my species. Tell me, how does it feel to need us? Krellian opened his mouth to deliver the diplomatic speech he had rehearsed for days. Instead, what emerged was the truth. Terrifying, he said. You terrify me, all of you. You're not human anymore. You're something else entirely. Vasquez's lips curved into the same knot smile Nyx had worn. Correct. We are what humanity becomes when stripped of hope, abandoned by allies, and given only one choice: evolve or die. We chose to evolve, and now you come crawling back, begging for protection from an enemy we have been fighting alone for a century. We made a mistake. You made a judgment. Vasquez's voice sliced through his words like a blade. You judged us too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be part of your civilized order, and you were right. We were all of those things, but you forgot something essential about humanity, something your records never understood. Krellian waited. We are at our most dangerous when we have nothing left to lose. You took everything from us, our place in the galaxy, our access to trade and technology, our hope, and then the Shroud came and took everything else, our cities, our oceans, our sky, our children. Her voice broke on the final word, a crack of emotion that made the displays around her flicker. 1.2 billion of our children, High Ambassador. Do you know what that does to species? I cannot imagine. You can, you will, because unless we agree to help you, your species will suffer the same fate. The Shroud does not discriminate. It does not care about council politics or ancient exiles. It simply consumes. Vasquez's optical sensors fixed on him with terrible intensity. So now you must convince me. Why should humanity save the species that condemned us to die alone? Krellian felt the weight of 2 centuries of history pressing down on him. The answer to her question would determine the fate of trillions, and he did not have an answer that felt adequate. Because we were wrong, he said, and because if you let us die, you become what we always feared you were. The silence stretched. The displays flickered, and somewhere deep in the network that connected every human mind, a debate began that would determine the future of the galaxy. Vasquez smiled. This time it almost reached her eyes. Now that, she said, is the first honest thing anyone from the Council has said to me in 200 years. Perhaps there's hope for you yet. Part 5, The Relic Fleet. The tactical briefing chamber aboard the human flagship Infinite Resolve hummed with the quiet power of dormant weapon systems. Krelian sat at a conference table that had been shaped to accommodate his Vornath physiology, a gesture of hospitality that felt strangely discordant against the cold efficiency of everything else in human space. Around him, the surviving members of his diplomatic delegation shifted nervously. Several had requested sedation. One Telsari Attaché had simply shut down, entering a protective coma from which the ship's medical systems had been unable to rouse her. Commander Nix stood at the head of the table. Her armor now retracted into a form-fitting undersuit that revealed the extent of human augmentation. Neural interface ports studded her temples, her spine, her forearms. Beneath the pale skin, Krelian could see the faint glow of subcutaneous circuitry pulsing in time with the ship's systems. She was not piloting the vessel. She was the vessel. Her consciousness distributed across its hull and weapons and engines. 3 hours ago, Nix began, Shroud forces breached the outer defenses of the Telsari home system. The Council's Third Fleet engaged them at the Carinae Nebula and was destroyed in 27 minutes. Survivors, none. The holographic display at the center of the table shifted, showing the tactical situation. The Shroud's advance was marked in consuming green, spreading like infection through Council space. Krelian watched his own home systems, the Vornath Dominion's core worlds, blinking in the path of the approaching wave. At current velocity, the Shroud will reach Vornath Prime in 73 days, Nix continued. Your fleet has approximately 18 ships capable of mounting meaningful resistance. The Shroud force currently advancing toward your territory numbers approximately 4,000 vessels. The numbers were absurd, impossible. The Council's entire combined military might would be swept aside like dust before a stellar wind. What are you going to do? Krelian asked. It was not an accusation. It was a genuine question asked by a being who had exhausted all other options. Nix's eyes, still that unsettling gunmetal gray, met his. We are going to show you something. Ambassador Vasquez has authorized full disclosure. Consider it a gesture of what is your word? Trust. The holographic display shifted again, zooming out from the tactical map to show the entire galaxy. Human territory was highlighted in red, those scattered constellations of force Krelian had glimpsed earlier. But now he could see the pattern. The arrangement was not random. It was a net, a trap, a strategic deployment that had been positioned over the course of a century to encircle something vast and terrible. The Shroud is not a natural phenomenon, Nix said. It is a weapon designed by a species that went extinct 3 million years ago, programmed to consume all intelligent life to prevent any potential rivals from emerging. When it first attacked Earth, we captured one of its control nodes. We learned its origin, and we learned something else. The display shifted to show a region of space near the galactic core, a region Krelian recognized. The Shroud's primary breeding ground is located here, in the heart of Council territory. It has been dormant for millennia, slowly building strength. The attacks on your outer colonies were probing strikes. The main assault has not yet begun. Krelian's blood ran cold in his veins. The galactic core was the most densely populated region of Council space. Trillions of sentients lived there on thousands of worlds. If the Shroud's main force emerged there, we have been preparing for this war for a century, Nix said. Every ship, every weapon, every augmented soldier. We knew the Council would never believe us if we warned them. So, we waited, we built, and we prepared to do what your species could not. What is that? Nix's expression did not change, but something in her voice shifted. A note of something that might have been pride or sorrow, or both. We are going to destroy the Shrouds permanently, and we are going to do it by burning the galactic core. Krelian's translator implant stuttered as it tried to process the statement. Burning? You cannot mean the Shroud's breeding ground is embedded in the stars themselves. To destroy it, we must trigger a chain reaction that will sterilize approximately 12,000 cubic light-years of space. Every star, every planet, every living thing within that region. Nix paused, including, I should note, the Council's capital worlds. The chamber erupted. Krellian's delegation, those who were still conscious, began shouting over each other in a cacophony of translated panic. Krellian himself could not speak. The horror of what Nyx was proposing was beyond comprehension. The galactic core was home to hundreds of billions of sentience. The Council's entire political and cultural infrastructure was centered there. You would commit genocide, Krellian finally managed, on a scale that we would win. Nyx interrupted. The alternative is that the Shroud consumes the entire galaxy, killing trillions over the next 1,000 years. We have run the simulations. We have calculated the math. This is the only path to victory. There must be another way. There was another way. The voice came from behind Krellian. He turned to see Ambassador Vasquez entering the chamber, her augmented body gliding across the deck with the same mechanical precision as her soldiers. 2 centuries ago, humanity offered the Council a military alliance. If you had accepted, we would have shared our technology, our strategies, our understanding of the threat. Together, we might have found a solution that did not require such sacrifice, but you exiled us. And now the math has changed. Vasquez took her place at the head of the table, her optical sensors sweeping across the Council delegation with something that might have been contempt or pity or both. The core will burn, she said. The question is whether we evacuate the population first or let them burn with it. That decision is yours, High Ambassador. Convince me your people are worth saving. Krellian stared at her, at the cold metal and colder eyes, and understood that this was not a negotiation. This was a test, a final examination of whether the Galactic Council was capable of the same sacrifice humanity had been forced to make. How long do we have? He asked. 60 days. Then the fleet moves with or without your cooperation. Then we had better get started. For the first time, something that might have been respect flickered across Vasquez's features. Yes, we had. Part 6, The Unraveling of Fear. The evacuation of the galactic core was the largest logistical operation in the history of civilized space. Krellian watched from the command deck of the Infinite Resolve as the human fleet dispersed across Council territory, their ships moving with the impossible synchronization of the neural network that bound them together. They did not argue with local authorities. They did not negotiate timelines. They simply arrived, presented evacuation protocols, and began loading civilian populations into transport vessels. Resistance was minimal. The Shroud's advance had shattered whatever illusions the Council species had maintained about their military capabilities. When beings faced extinction, they became remarkably cooperative. Krellian had not slept in 11 days. His Vornith physiology could function for extended periods without rest, but even his limits were approaching. The weight of what he had agreed to press down on him with every passing hour. 12,000 cubic light-years of space sterilized. Hundreds of worlds reduced to ash. The heart of galactic civilization burned out to prevent an even greater catastrophe. You are experiencing guilt, a voice said. Krellian turned. Commander Nyx stood behind him, her armor retracted, her expression unreadable. She had been his constant shadow since the evacuation began, part bodyguard, part warden, part something else he could not quite identify. I am experiencing horror, Krellian corrected. There is a difference. Is there? Nyx moved to stand beside him at the viewport. Outside, the transport ships continued their endless procession, ferrying millions of refugees to safety. Guilt is a response to actions you have taken. Horror is a response to actions you have witnessed. You authorized the evacuation. You agreed to the sterilization. The horror you feel is the reflection of your own choices. You speak as if you have experience with such feelings. Nyx was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its mechanical precision. I was 12 years old when the Shroud attacked my home. The city was called Vancouver. It was one of the last human settlements on the western coast of the North American continent. The Shroud's weapons melted the ice caps and flooded the coastal regions, but my family had already evacuated inland by then. Krellian waited. We were in a refugee convoy heading east when a Shroud strike force hit us. Atmospheric fighters. They strafed the convoy for 17 minutes. My mother shielded me with her body. She died. My father pulled me from the wreckage and carried me for 3 days until we reached a military outpost. He died of his injuries the day we arrived. I am sorry, Krellian said. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. Nix's voice hardened again. I am telling you this so you understand. Every human you have met has a similar story. We are a species of survivors. We survived because we were willing to make choices that other species found unthinkable. We burned our own worlds to deny the Shroud resources. We sacrificed our own populations to buy time for others to escape. We did horrible things to ourselves. She gestured at her augmented body, because the alternative was extinction. You became monsters. Yes, we became monsters. And now the monsters are the only things standing between the galaxy and annihilation. Nix turned to face him fully. You feel horror at what we are about to do to the galactic core. Good. That horror is evidence that you are still capable of moral reasoning, but do not let it paralyze you. The Shroud will not hesitate. Neither can we. An alert chimed through the ship systems. Nix's eyes unfocused for a moment as she accessed the data stream, and Krellian saw her expression shift, the closest thing to genuine emotion he had witnessed from her. The Shroud has launched a counterattack, she said, a massive force emerging from the core breeding grounds. They know what we're planning. They're trying to break through to the evacuation fleets. How many? 12,000 vessels, maybe more. Nix's armor began flowing back into place, covering her body in liquid darkness. The human fleet is moving to intercept. This is the battle we have been preparing for since the day Earth burned. Can you win? Nix's faceplate sealed, hiding her features behind the impersonal mask of a soldier. But before it did, Krellian saw something in her eyes. Not the gunmetal flatness he had grown accustomed to, but something older. Something wrong. We have to, she said. There is no other choice. The Infinite Resolve shuddered as its engines engaged, and the flagship of the human fleet turned toward the approaching storm. On the tactical displays, 12, 00 green icons converged on the fragile line of red that stood between them and the evacuation ships. The fate of trillions hung in the balance, and somewhere in the chaos, a single human marine, a young woman named Kaylin, barely old enough to remember a time before the war, loaded her weapon and whispered a fragment of an ancient song her grandmother had taught her. A lullaby, a piece of humanity the machines could not erase. She was about to find out if it was enough. Part 7, the plea accepted. The battle raged for 31 hours. Krellian watched from the Infinite Resolve's observation deck as the human fleet engaged the Shroud with a ferocity that defied description. Their ships moved like extensions of a single will, dodging, weaving, striking with precision that no organic crew could have achieved. Every vessel was linked through the neural network. Every pilot and gunner and tactical officer operating as a unified consciousness that processed combat data at the speed of light. And still, the Shroud kept coming. By the 20th hour, the human fleet had lost 300 ships. By the 25th, the number had climbed to 500. The Shroud's biomechanical vessels disintegrated under human weapons fire. But there were always more. Always another wave. Always another impossible angle of attack. They're going to break through, Krellian said, watching the tactical display with mounting horror. There are too many. Ambassador Vasquez stood beside him. Her augmented body connected to the ship systems by a dozen data cables. Her optical sensors remained fixed on the battle, but her was calm, almost serene. The evacuation is 93% complete. 12 more hours and we will have saved everyone who can be saved. 12 hours is too long. Your fleet cannot hold. No, it cannot. Vasquez turned to face him, but there is another option. A final contingency we prepared for this exact scenario. What contingency? Vasquez raised a metal hand and the tactical display shifted. A new icon appeared, a single ship positioned at the edge of the system, far from the main battle. Its design was unlike anything Krellian had seen. Sleek, compact, radiating energy signatures that made the infinite resolve sensors stutter. The promise of Earth, Vasquez said, a prototype vessel equipped with a weapon we developed from the Shroud control node we captured. It is designed to trigger the chain reaction in the galactic core, but it has to be delivered directly into the breeding ground, a suicide mission. You're going to activate the sterilization now, before the evacuation is complete. There is no choice. If the Shroud breaks through our lines, the evacuation fleets will be destroyed. The sterilization must happen now while we still have the chance. Vasquez's optical sensors dimmed for a moment, the closest thing to a blink Krellian had seen from her. I am transferring command authority to you, High Ambassador. The decision is yours. Krellian stared at her. Why? Why would you give me this choice? Because when this is over, the galaxy will need someone who was not responsible for what happened here. Humanity will be feared, perhaps rightfully so, but if a representative of the Council makes the final decision, if a Vornith diplomat gives the order to sacrifice the core to save the rest of civilization, then perhaps there is a future where our species can coexist. Vasquez's voice softened, losing the mechanical harmonics that usually accompanied it. We have been monsters because the situation required monsters, but we do not wish to remain monsters forever. Give us a chance to be something else. The weight of the moment pressed down on Krellian with physical force. Billions of sentients were still in the core, waiting for evacuation ships that would never arrive. The decision to sacrifice them, to sacrifice his own people's cultural and political heart, would damn him in the eyes of history. But the alternative was the death of trillions. Give the order, Krellian said. Launch the promise of Earth. Vasquez nodded. The command transmitted through the network at the speed of thought, and on the tactical display, the prototype vessel began its final journey toward the galactic core. On the front lines, Commander Nix received the order. Her squadron had been reduced to 12 ships, all damaged, all running on emergency power. The Shroud's main force was pressing hard against her position, and she knew she would not survive the next wave. All units, she transmitted across the network. The promise is away. We need to buy it 8 more minutes. Anyone who can still fight form on my position. The responses came back in a chorus of voices, human voices, stripped of their mechanical precision by exhaustion and damage, and the sheer overwhelming scale of the battle. Copy, Commander. Moving to support. Holding the line, give them hell. For Vancouver. The last transmission came from Marine Kalin, whose ground position had been overrun by Shroud bioforms. She was the only survivor of her squad. Her armor breached in a dozen places, her ammunition nearly exhausted, but she was still fighting. For Vancouver, Nix echoed, for Earth, for everyone who didn't make it this far. The remaining human forces converged on Nix's position, forming a shield of fire and steel around the promise of Earth's flight path. The Shroud threw everything it had at them. Waves of fighters, swarms of biomechanical torpedoes, tendrils of consuming energy that unraveled reality itself, and the humans held. One by one, their ships died, but for 8 minutes they held. The promise of Earth reached the galactic core and detonated. The chain reaction spread faster than light, jumping from star to star, consuming the Shroud's breeding grounds in a cascade of purifying fire. Krellian watched on the displays as 12,000 cubic light-years of space transformed into a funeral pyre. The Shroud's main force, cut off from its source, began to wither and die. The surviving human ships pressed the advantage, hunting down the remnants with methodical precision. And when it was over, When the last Shroud vessel had been reduced to atoms, Krelian found himself standing in the silence of the observation deck, tears streaming down his face. Ambassador Vasquez stood beside him. Her optical sensors were dimmed, and Krelian realized with a shock that she was weeping, or whatever passed for weeping in a body that was more machine than flesh. "It is done," she said. "The Shroud is destroyed. The galaxy is saved." "At what cost?" Vasquez turned to face him. "The cost was paid 200 years ago when your council cast us out. Everything since then has been interest on that debt." A signal chimed through the ship systems, an incoming transmission from the council's surviving leadership, those who had been evacuated before the core burned. Krelian accepted it with a gesture. The faces of a dozen species appeared on the display. They were haggard, exhausted, hollowed out by the horror they had witnessed, but they were alive. "High Ambassador Krelian," the Telsari representative said, "the same species that had once argued most strongly for humanity's exile. The Council has convened an emergency session. We Snorts have voted unanimously to formally request humanity's return to the Galactic Council. Full membership, full privileges, whatever terms they require." Krelian looked at Vasquez. "The Council pleads for humanity's comeback. What is your answer?" Vasquez was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 2 centuries of suffering and the fragile, tentative hope of a species that had forgotten how to hope. "We accept, but not as the humanity you exiled. We are something new now, something shaped by fire and sacrifice and impossible choices. We will join your council, but we will not pretend to be what we were." "What will you be?" Vasquez's optical sensors brightened, and for the first time since Krelian had met her, she smiled, a real smile, warm and sad and entirely human. "Your conscience, your shield, and if necessary, your sword. We will be the ones who make the hard choices so you do not have to. We will be the monsters who guard the light." She extended her hand, the same gesture the ancient human diplomats had used 2 centuries ago when they had offered friendship and been rejected. "Do you accept?" Krelian took her hand. The metal was warm beneath his manipulators, humming with the power of the network that bound humanity together. "We accept," he said. And somewhere in the wreckage of the battlefield, Marine Kalin, alive, impossibly alive, pulled from the ruins by a rescue team, opened her eyes and heard her daughter's voice through the neural network. A transmission from the evacuation fleet. A lullaby passed down through generations, preserved against all odds. Humanity was coming home. Not as the dreamers they once were, but as the survivors they had become, and the galaxy would never be the same.